My name is Roberto Garza, and I need to tell this story because it could save someone's life. I'm 54 years old now. I live in a small town near Saltillo in Coahuila, and I work as a night watchman at a warehouse. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when I was known throughout Nuevo Leon as the healing pastor, the man God used to cure the sick whom the doctors had already given up on. What I'm about to tell you happened between 2005 and 2017 in the city of Monterey, and I swear on my life, every word is true. It all started when I was an accountant, 42 years old, married to Lucia, and we had 2 grown children. Amanda was 16 and Diego was 12. We lived in a modest house in the Independencia neighborhood, near Cerro de la Campana. We weren't rich, but we lived comfortably. We went to a small Christian church that met in a building near the Juarez market. I was just another brother in the pews. I helped with the congregation's finances because that's what I knew how to do. Nothing special, or so I thought. In September 2005, I had a massive heart attack at the office. I was reviewing some bank statements when I felt a pain in my chest that knocked me out of my chair. My colleagues called an ambulance, but by the time I got to the university hospital, my heart had already stopped beating. The doctors later said I was clinically dead for almost 4 minutes. 4 minutes without a pulse, without breathing, without anything. My wife, Lucia, arrived at the hospital and they told her to prepare for the worst. But in those 4 minutes, I saw something. I don't know if it was heaven or a prelude to heaven, but I saw a light I can't describe with human words and heard a voice as clear as water that told me, "It's not your time yet, Roberto. I'm going to bring you back, and you're going to heal my people." When I woke up in a hospital bed with tubes all over me and hallucinating, crying beside me, I knew something had changed forever. Something inside me was different. The doctors couldn't explain my recovery. The cardiologist, a man named Trevino, told me that based on all the tests, I should be dead or in a vegetative state. But there I was, sitting up in bed, talking normally, without any after effects. They ran tests for 2 weeks. Everything came back normal. Drive, Trevino told me before I was discharged. "Mr. Garza, I'm a man of science. But what happened to you has no medical explanation. Someone up there wants you alive." When I returned to church, everything changed. At the first service after my recovery, the pastor asked me to come forward and share my testimony. As I was speaking, I saw a woman in the 3rd row who had a cane. Something compelled me to approach her. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she had severe arthritis in her knees, that the doctors had told her she would never walk without a cane again. I placed my hands on her knees and prayed. I don't even know what words I said, and the woman stood up without a cane. She walked the entire length of the church aisle, weeping and praising God. From that day on, the healings didn't stop. Every service was the same. I laid hands on them, and people were healed. Tumors disappeared. Diabetics stopped taking insulin. A child born deaf began to hear. The doctors didn't understand. People came from all over Monterey, from Guadalupe, from San Nicolas, even from Saltillo and Torreon. The little church in the Juarez market became too small. In less than a year, we already had 300 members. The pastor of the church, a good man named Brother Menz, called me to his office one day. He told me that he felt God was calling me to pastoral ministry, that he was getting old and wanted to retire, and that I should take his place. I told him I wasn't ready, that I was just an accountant. He smiled and told me, "Roberto, God doesn't call the prepared. He prepares the called." A month later, I was the new pastor of the congregation. They called me Pastor Roberto, the healing man. The church grew to 500 members, then to 800. We bought a larger property near Constitution Avenue. I appeared on Christian radio programs. People lined up for me to pray for them, and I began to believe that all of this was due to my own merit. I began to believe that I was special, that God had chosen me from among millions because I deserved it, and that's where I began to fall, because when you believe you are special, you forget where you came from and, above all, you forget who lifted you up. Fame came too quickly, and I wasn't prepared to handle it. By 2007, I was being invited to preach in cities I didn't even know: Guadalajara, Mexico City, Tijuana, even Latino churches in Houston and San Antonio. Wherever I went, the sanctuary was packed. People wanted seeing the pastor who had risen from the dead, the man who healed the sick with just a touch, and I began to enjoy that attention more than I should have. It was that year that I demanded a change. I called the church elders to my office and told them I no longer wanted to be called pastor. I wanted to be called Apostle, Apostle Roberto Garza. Some looked at each other. I saw in their eyes that they found it strange, but no one had the courage to contradict me. After all, I was the healing man, the one who filled the church, the one who brought in the offerings. They accepted it silently, and I thought that was respect. Today I know it was fear. That same year one bought a brand new black suburban SUV with leather seats and tinted windows. I parked it right in front of the church, where everyone would see it when they arrived for the service. I made sure to wash it every Saturday. That shone like a mirror. Meanwhile, there were families from the congregation who arrived by city bus because they couldn't even afford a taxi, families who came to ask for help with rent or medicine. I gave them something from the charity box and served them quickly so as not to delay my commitments. Lucia was the first to notice that I was changing. She had known me since we were 20 years old. She knew who I really was. She started complaining that I no longer prayed at home, that I no longer read the Bible with the young people as I used to. I spent hours in front of the mirror practicing my sermons, rehearsing gestures, perfecting my tone of voice for healings. She told me I was becoming vain. I told her that she didn't understand the weight of the apostolic calling. One day a pastor from Tampico came to visit us. His name was Don Eliseo, a man nearly 75 years old, with completely white hair, who had been preaching the gospel for over 50 years. He was known throughout the Northeast for his humility and wisdom. He came unexpectedly. He said he wanted to meet the young apostle everyone was talking about. The church was excited. They thought he was going to preach a special message with me. But when it was time for the service, I wouldn't let him go up to the pulpit. I told the program coordinator that people had come to see me, not to listen to some old man from Tampico, that Don Eliseo could give a brief greeting, but the sermon was mine and mine alone. The coordinator was stunned, but he obeyed. Don Eliseo listened to everything from the front row. He didn't complain. He didn't make a scene. He just sat there with his eyes closed as if he were praying. His silence irritated me more than if he had shouted. After the service, Don Eliseo left without saying goodbye, but at the church door he stopped, turned around, and took my arm. His eyes were sad, not angry. He said in a low voice, just loud enough for me to hear, "Son, be careful. The altar that vanity builds, vanity itself tears down." I pulled my arm away and shrugged. I told him he didn't understand the new generation of ministers. He just shook his head and left. I never saw that man of God again. The night I got home late, Lucia was already in bed, but she wasn't asleep. I went into the room, took her off my suit, and stood looking at myself in the vanity mirror while I combed my hair. I didn't know she was watching me. I didn't know she heard me mutter under my breath, almost without realizing it, "Without me, this church is nothing." Those words came out of my mouth as if they were the absolute truth, and at that moment, I truly believed it. When I went to bed, Lucia was lying on her back. I thought she had fallen asleep, but in the early morning, I woke up to a strange noise. It was her crying softly, trying not to make a sound so as not to wake me. She cried until dawn. I pretended not to hear. I pretended because deep down I knew that I was the reason for her crying, and I didn't want to face that. It was easier to pretend to be asleep and act as if everything was fine. The worst part is that I had everything. I had a wife who had loved me for over 20 years, 2 healthy children, a full church, the respect of an entire city, but none of that was enough. I wanted more. I wanted to be bigger, more famous, more powerful, and that hunger that nothing could satisfy, was what opened the door to what came next, because when you believe you deserve the world, you become vulnerable to whoever offers it to you on a silver platter. In March 2009, something happened that I never imagined was possible. It was a Sunday like any other. The church was full with more than 700 people, and I went up to the pulpit ready to minister healing as I always did. I closed my eyes, raised my hands, waited to feel that warmth in my chest that always came before the healings, and nothing came, absolutely nothing, only darkness, only silence. The heavens had closed. I tried to hide it. I started saying generic things, the kind any preacher would say, that God was working, that there were people who needed deliverance, that victory was on the way. Empty words that didn't heal anyone. People noticed. I saw the confusion and disappointment in their eyes. This wasn't the Apostle Roberto they knew. This was an ordinary man trying to pretend he still had power. Some even left before the service was over. That week, 17 families left the church. They went to a new congregation that had opened in the Cumbers neighborhood, where a young pastor was making a lot of noise with supposed miracles. When I found out, my stomach churned with rage. How dare they abandon me after everything I had done for them? I had healed them, given them hope, built that church with my own hands, and now they were leaving because I had a bad Sunday. I tried everything in the following weeks. I fasted for 21 days, drinking only water and a little juice. I kept vigil alone in the temple until sunrise. I cried out, I wept, I screamed, begging God to answer me. Nothing. The silence continued. It was as if someone had turned off a valve inside me, where healing once flowed. Now there was only dryness, and with each service, more people left. In 3 months, the church had dwindled from 700 to 550. It was a Wednesday in June when I experienced the worst embarrassment of my life. A woman named Doña Esperanza arrived at the service with her 6-year-old grandson. The boy's name was Carlitos and he had leukemia. The doctors at the children's hospital had given him 3 months to live. The grandmother came to the front with the boy in her arms and asked me, in front of everyone, to say a word, to heal her little grandson as I had healed so many others. I placed my hands on the child's head, closed my eyes, and waited for silence. I waited for nothing more. A minute passed, 2 minutes. I felt the sweat running down my back. The whole church was silent, waiting for the miracle. Doña Esperanza was waiting. The child looked at me with those big eyes, full of innocence, waiting, and I had nothing to give them, absolutely nothing. After almost 3 minutes of that unbearable silence, Doña Esperanza took the child from my arms. She looked at me with a disappointment that broke my heart and said loudly, so everyone could hear, "You no longer have the gift, Pastor, you lost the anointing." Then she turned and left the church with Carlitos by the hand. Nobody said anything, nobody moved. I stood there at the altar with my hands still outstretched toward nothingness, completely alone. That was the longest night of my life. I went home and couldn't sleep. I sat in the backyard until dawn thinking about what had happened. How could God do this to me? I had given up my accounting career for him. I had dedicated myself, preached, healed in his name. And now he was abandoning me like this, out of nowhere, without explanation. Rage mingled with despair, and despair mingled with shame. Everything swirled in my chest like a hurricane. Lucia tried to talk to me that week. She told me that maybe God was trying to teach me something, that perhaps I needed to return to the humility of the beginning. I yelled at her, told her she didn't understand anything, that she was just a housewife and didn't know what it was like to carry a church on her back. She didn't respond. She just looked at me with those sad eyes and went to the room. I had hurt the only person who was still on my side and I didn't even care. I was desperate, and desperate people do things they would never do in their right mind. I was willing to do anything to regain my power, to regain my fame, to fill that church again, anything, and it was exactly in that moment of weakness that he appeared. The man in the black suit who was going to change my life forever, but not in the way I expected. I only realized it later, but that man had been watching me for weeks. When I thought back, I remembered seeing him at least 4 services in a row before he spoke to me, always in the back row, always wearing the same immaculate black suit, always with a strange smile on his face, and always staring intently at me from the pulpit, as if studying my every move. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured he was just another curious visitor, A deaconess named Sister Martito alerted me one Sunday. She came to find me after the service, looking worried. She said, "Pastor, who is that man in the black suit? Every time I look at him, I get a chill all over my body." I glanced toward the back row, and he was still sitting there, smiling, as if he knew we were talking about him. I told Martito it was just her imagination, that it was nothing, but I confess I also felt something strange when our eyes met. It was a Wednesday in July when he finally came to talk to me. The service had ended, everyone had left, and I was in the parking lot walking toward my truck. He was leaning against a lamppost as if he were waiting for me. Up close, he looked about 65 years old, with gray hair combed back, very smooth skin, almost without wrinkles, and that black suit that never seemed to get dirty, even though it was the middle of a Monterey summer with temperatures over 35 degrees Celsius. He told me his name was Don Orleo, that he was from Mexico City, and that he had heard a lot about the famous Apostle Roberto, the healing man. I thanked him for the compliment, already somewhat suspicious. Then he said something that chilled me to the bone. "Pastor, I know what you're going through, and I can help you." I asked him how he knew. He just smiled and said that he knew many things, that he was a man of many resources and many connections. I asked him if he was a Christian. He chuckled softly and replied, "I am a man of faith, Pastor. But the important question is another, do you want to regain your power or not?" Those words entered my ears like sweet poison. I should have left right then. I should have gotten in the truck and never looked back, but I was desperate. 3 months without healings. The church emptying out, shame eating me up inside. I needed a solution. Don Orleo extended his hand to greet me. When I shook it, I felt a shock. His hand was icy cold, not cold like a normal person's hand on a cool day. It was ice cold, as if there was no blood running through it. And the strangest thing was, I looked down at the ground and realized that under the lamppost he had no shadow. My shadow was there, stretched out on the ground. His didn't exist. I should have run. Anyone with even a modicum of spiritual discernment would have noticed that something was very wrong, but vanity and desperation had blinded me. I wanted so badly to recover what I had lost that I was willing to ignore all the signs. So, instead of leaving, I asked, "What do I need to do?" And the moment those words left my mouth, I saw Don Orleo's eyes shine in a way that wasn't human. He smiled. At 21 minutes, 29 seconds sonrisa demasiado ancho que mostraba demasiados dents, wide-eyed el próximo. Tuesday, November 1st, Day of the Dead, at midnight. "I'll come pick it up here, don't tell anyone." I asked where we were going. He said he was taking me somewhere where I could recover everything I had lost and more, much more than I ever dreamed of. I should have asked more questions. I should have been suspicious, but I just nodded and said I would be waiting. I spent the next 2 weeks restless. I couldn't eat properly, I couldn't sleep. Lucia asked me what was wrong, and I told her it was nothing, just tiredness. She didn't believe me. I saw it in her eyes, but she didn't press the issue. I think by then she had stopped trying to understand me, had stopped trying to save me from myself, and I was too busy with my plans to realize I was losing her. On the night of October 31st, the eve of the Day of the Dead, I told Lucia I was going to hold a special vigil at the church. She didn't question it. I left the house at 11:30 and went to the church parking lot. At the stroke of midnight, a black Lincoln appeared. Don Orleo was behind the wheel, wearing that same black suit. With that same smile, he opened the passenger door and said, "Come on, Pastor, it's time to change your life." I got in the car, and at that moment, without knowing it, I was entering hell. The black Lincoln drove through the dark streets of Monterey without Don Orleo saying a word. I also remained silent, looking out the window, watching the city lights recede into the distance. We took the highway south, heading for a town called Santiago. The moon was full that night, and the Sierra Madre mountains looked like sleeping giants in the distance. It was the Day of the Dead, and in the houses we passed, we saw altars with votive candles and marigolds glowing in the darkness. After about 40 minutes of driving, Don Orleo turned off onto a dirt road I didn't recognize. We drove among mesquite and Uizark trees for another 15 minutes, until we arrived at a place that chilled me to the bone. It was an old, abandoned cemetery, with a half-collapsed stone wall and a rusty iron gate that was wide open. The graves were covered in dry grass, and many crosses were crooked or lying on the ground. The place smelled of damp earth and something else, something rotten that I couldn't identify. Don Orleo parked and gestured for me to follow him. I got out of the car, my legs trembling. Something inside me screamed for me to go back, to run, to get out of there while I still could, but I ignored it. I had come too far to turn back. I walked behind Don Orleo among the old graves, my feet crunching on the dry grass, until we reached the center of the cemetery, where there was a huge, twisted tree, its dry branches pointing skyward like claws. Don Orleo said that that place was special. He said that the bones of people who had held power in life rested, the sorcerers, healers, people who knew how to wield the forces of the other world. He said their spirits still lingered there, especially on the Day of the Dead, when the door between the worlds opened. I asked him what kind of deal I had to make. He looked at me with those dark eyes and said, "You're going to regain the gift of healing stronger than before. In return, you're going to do whatever they ask. Sometimes it's an offering, sometimes it's a soul." I should have run away right then. I knew deep down that this was wrong, that I was about to cross a line of no return, but then I thought of the church emptying out. I thought of Doña Esperanza telling me I had lost the anointing. I thought of the 17 families who left. I thought of the shame, the humiliation, the fear of becoming a nobody again, and those thoughts were stronger than the voice of God, which begged me not to do it. Don Orleo took a black votive candle and a small handheld mirror, one of those women use for makeup, from his jacket pocket. He lit the candle with a silver lighter and placed it on a tombstone in front of the tree. Then he held the mirror up to my face and said, "Look in the mirror and say you accept." I looked. The candle's light cast strange shadows on my face, and for a second I swear I saw another face in the reflection, a face that wasn't mine, a face that was smiling with a horrible smile. "Even so," I said it, "I accept." The words came out of my mouth and seemed to echo in that empty cemetery. At that same instant, I felt a pain in my chest. It wasn't the pain of a heart attack like the one I'd had years before. It was different. It was as if something was forcing its way inside me, making its way in, settling in. My legs gave way, and I fell to my knees on a grave. My stomach churned, and I vomited right there, among the crosses and dry grass, while Don Orleo watched silently. When I was able to lift my head, Don Orleo was smiling. That wide smile, with too many teeth, said to me in a low voice, almost whispering, "There, now you're ours." I wanted to ask him what he meant by that, but I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my whole body was shaking. I could only stay there on my knees, feeling that something had changed forever inside me, something dark, something that shouldn't be there. The ride back was silent. Don Orleo dropped me off in the church parking lot around 3 a.m. Before I got out of the car, he said, "The healings will return tomorrow, and every Tuesday and Friday at 3 o'clock a.m., you'll receive updates. Don't be alarmed by what you feel, it's normal." I asked what kind of things I was going to feel. He just laughed and said, "You'll find out." Then he started the Lincoln and disappeared into the darkness. I went inside my house trying not to make a sound. Lucia was asleep or pretending to be asleep. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. It looked like the same face as always, but there was something different about my eyes, something darker, colder, as if a shadow had settled behind my pupils. I washed my face and went to bed thinking I wouldn't be able to sleep. But I fell asleep in seconds, and that night I had the first of many nightmares that would haunt me for the next few years. I had sold my soul in a Day of the Dead cemetery, and I still didn't know the true price I was going to pay. The following Sunday I went up to the pulpit not knowing what to expect. The church was emptier than before, maybe 400 people. I closed my eyes, raised my hands as I always did, and waited. This time it came, but it was different. Before, the gift came like a gentle breeze, a soft warmth in my chest that showed me whom to touch and what to say. Now it was like a violent gust, an avalanche of power that invaded me without asking permission. I felt my hands burning as if they were on fire from within. I stepped down from the pulpit and walked toward a woman in the second row. I didn't know her, I had never seen her. But something told me she had a cyst on her left ovary. I told her. She opened her eyes wide and began to cry. I placed my hands on her stomach and prayed. I felt something move beneath my palms, something dissolving. The woman fell to the ground trembling and crying out that she felt warmth inside. When she got up, she said that the pain she had had for months had completely disappeared. The news spread throughout Monterrey in a matter of days. Apostle Roberto had returned more powerful than ever. In 1 month, the church was back to 500 members. In 2 months, 700. In 6 months, more than 1,000. We had to hold 3 services on Sundays to accommodate everyone. We bought a larger property in the Guadalupe area. I appeared on local television on a Christian morning show. I was king again, bigger than before, but there was a price no one saw. Every Tuesday and Friday at 3 o'clock a.m. sharp, I would wake up with violent nausea. It was as if someone were digging their fingers into my head and stirring everything up. I would go to the bathroom, lock the door, and lie there trembling while voices whispered in my mind. They were the spirits updating the information. As Don Aurelio had said, they showed me illnesses, pains, tumors of people I didn't even know yet. In a service in March 2010, I pointed out a woman named Rosario. She was new to the church, about 40 years old. She seemed like a normal person, but I started revealing things about her, details of her marriage, intimate, embarrassing things a husband and wife do in the privacy of their bedroom. I said it all in front of more than 300 people. Rosario turned red, then white, then ran out crying. Everyone was silent. The next day I found out that Rosario had tried to take her own life. She took a whole bottle of sleeping pills. Her husband arrived in time and rushed her to the hospital. She survived, but she never returned to the church. She never looked me in the face again, and I found out about it and I felt nothing, no guilt, no remorse, no sadness. It was as if the part of me that felt those things had died in that cemetery. 3 months after the pact, Don Aurelio appeared at my door. It was a Tuesday night. Lucia and the boys were already asleep. He was wearing his usual black suit, with his usual smile. He said the spirits were satisfied with me, that I was doing a good job. But now they wanted something in return. They want a name? He said, someone from your church. You choose who? I asked what they were going to do to that person. Don Aurelio just smiled and said that wasn't my business. He said I had a month to choose. If I didn't choose, they would choose for me, and it wasn't going to be just one person, it was going to be several. I wanted to protest, to say that wasn't the deal, but then I remembered his words in the cemetery, sometimes is an offering, sometimes it's a soul. I had accepted that. I had said yes. Sister Consuelo, the oldest intercessor in the church, began to look at me differently around that time. She was 74 years old, almost 50 years old. Having known the Lord, she got up to pray every day at 4 o'clock a.m. One Sunday she pulled me aside and told me she was having nightmares about me. She said she saw me preaching, but behind me there was a dark shadow with red eyes whispering in my ear. I laughed in her face. I told her it was just old age, that I was probably losing my mind. She didn't answer, she just looked at me with pity and left. I was on top of the world, but sinking into hell without even realizing it. I had a packed church, money pouring in, fame growing every day, but inside I was rotting away, and the worst was yet to come. Don Aurelio had given me a month to choose a soul, and I, cowardly as I was, didn't choose anyone, so they, the musicians, chose for me, and the person they chose was someone I saw every Sunday in the front row, a 22-year-old named Daniela, who led the worship team with a voice that sounded like an angel's. Daniela was one of the most beloved young women in the church. She was 22, with long, black hair and a smile that lit up the entire sanctuary. She had led the worship team since she was 17, and when she sang, even the toughest people would cry. Her mother, Doña Carmen, was one of the most faithful members of the congregation. A widow for 10 years, she had raised her daughter alone, working as a domestic servant in homes in the San Pedro neighborhood. Daniela had just finished her nursing degree. Her whole life lay ahead of her. One Friday morning, 3 weeks after Don Orleo gave me the deadline, I woke up at 3 a.m., as usual, but this time it was different. The nausea was stronger, the voices louder, and in the midst of that whirlwind, I saw Daniela's face. I saw her driving her little car down the road. I was heading to Saltillo. I saw a semi-truck coming the wrong way. I saw the moment of impact. I saw her body among the twisted metal, and I saw a date, April 2011, 2 weeks to go. I understood in that instant what it meant. The spirits had chosen. Daniela was going to die, and I had seen how and when. A part of me, a small part that was still human, wanted to warn her, wanted to tell her the truth, tell her not to travel that road, do whatever it took to stop it. But another part, the part that now controlled me, knew it was pointless. The pact was made. Her soul had been chosen. There was no going back. The following Sunday, I did something I had never done before. In the middle of the service, while I was ministering healings, I pointed to Daniela. She was at the front with her microphone. She had just finished leading the worship, smiling as always. I looked her in the eyes and said in a voice that didn't sound like my own, "Daughter, God has shown me that you won't see summer this year. Be prepared." The entire church fell silent. Doña Carmen put her hands to her mouth. Daniela turned as white as a sheet. After the service, Doña Carmen came to talk to me, crying. She asked me what it meant, if her daughter was sick, if there was any way to change things. I told her it was a revelation from God, that sometimes God calls young people early because He has bigger plans for them. Lies, all of it, lies. I knew it wasn't God taking Daniela, it was me, it was the covenant, it was the spirits collecting the debt I refused to pay, and I let that woman cry in my office without feeling a thing. The next 2 weeks were strange. Daniela kept coming to church, but she was different, quieter, more pensive. She stopped singing in the worship team. Her mother organized a prayer chain, a 21-day fast, everything she could think of. Some people at church thought I was wrong, that this time the prophecy was wrong. I desperately wanted them to be right. Deep down, a part of me still wanted Daniela to live, but I knew it wasn't going to happen. On April 15, 2011, a Friday afternoon, Daniela took her car to visit an aunt in Saltillo. She was alone on the federal highway when a semi-truck coming from the opposite direction, music, lost control on a curve. The impact was brutal. Daniela died instantly. They didn't even have time to get her to the hospital. She was 22 years old, her whole life ahead of her, erased in a second on a curve in the highway. The news spread throughout Nuevo Leon. The pastor who had prophesied the death of a young woman, and the prophecy came true. Some said it was proof of God's power working in my life. Others began to fear me. The church, instead of emptying, became even more crowded. People came from far away to see the man who knew the hour of death. They treated me as if I were a prophet on the level of Elijah or Jeremiah. No one knew the truth. No one knew that I hadn't predicted Daniela's death. I had caused it. Don Orleo appeared at my house that night. I was alone because Lucia had gone to sleep at her mother's house with the boys. She could hardly stand living with me anymore. Don Orleo came in without knocking, sat in my living room as if he owned the place, and smiled. He said to me, "Very well, Roberto, the spirits are satisfied." The girl was a pure soul. It was worth a lot. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw myself at that man's neck and strangle him. But I couldn't move. My body wouldn't obey me. I asked if the debt was paid yet. Don Orleo laughed and said, "Paid. This is just the beginning. Now you're really ours, Roberto, and we're going to collect a lot more." Then he got up and left, leaving me alone in that dark room. I stayed there all that night thinking about Daniela's smile, Doña Carmen's tears, the twisted metal of the little car on the highway, and for the first time since the cemetery, I cried. I cried because I had finally understood the size of the hole I had dug myself into, and there was no ladder to get out. Starting in 2012, my life began to crumble from the inside. On the outside, I was still the powerful apostle. The church was still full, the money kept pouring in, but inside my house, everything was rotten. Lucia barely spoke to me. She slept in the guest room. She would get up early so she wouldn't have to have breakfast with me. When I tried to talk to her, she would answer with 1 or 2 words and leave. I had become a stranger in my own home. My son Diego, Muzho, was already 17, started causing problems in high school. One day the principal called me, asking me to come urgently. When I arrived, they told me they had caught Diego selling marijuana in the parking lot. The principal looked at me with a contemptuous expression and said, "You're not that famous pastor on TV, you should set an example at home first." I wanted to respond, but I didn't have anything to say. The man was absolutely right, but the worst thing was with my daughter Amanda. She was already 21, she was studying at the university. She was a quiet girl who had never caused any problems. One night in March, I woke up to screams coming from the room. I ran there thinking it was a nightmare. When I opened the door, I found her standing in the corner of the music room with her back to me, staring at the wall. She was speaking in a language I'd never heard before. It wasn't a prayer language, it wasn't anything divine, it was something ancient, guttural, that gave me goosebumps. I called her name. She stopped talking. She was silent for about 5 seconds. Then she turned toward me slowly, very slowly. Her eyes were blank, rolled back. All I could see was white, and with a voice that wasn't from. She, a deep, old man's voice, said, "Hello, Dad, your friends send their regards." I almost fell backward from fear of my own daughter. I screamed for Lucia, and we prayed all night until Amanda was back to normal. In the morning, Amanda didn't remember anything. She asked why we looked exhausted, why her mother was crying. We told her it was nothing, just a nightmare, but I knew the truth. The spirits were showing that they could come to my family whenever they wanted, that no one was safe, that I belonged to them, and everything that was mine belonged to them too, including my children. A week later, Lucia went to get something from my truck. I had forgotten to lock the trunk. She opened it and found a dead black chicken with its neck twisted on top of a red rag. It was one of the offerings that Don Aurelio had asked me to make. I had forgotten to get rid of it. Lucia stood there staring at it for a long time. She screamed. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She just slowly closed the trunk and went inside. When I got home from work that day, the house was empty. Lucia had packed her bags, grabbed the 2 boys, and gone to her mother's house in the Maitres neighborhood. On the dining room table was a note, a single sentence written in her trembling handwriting: "I married a man of God. I don't know who you are now." I read that note about 20 times. Each time it hurt more, but I didn't go looking for her. I didn't try to explain. I knew there was no possible explanation for what I had become. Around that time, I started getting a cough that wouldn't go away. I coughed all day, sometimes with blood. I went to 3 doctors. They did X-rays, CT scans, all kinds of tests. No one could find anything medical. I was completely healthy, but I knew it was vengeance. The spirits were consuming me from the inside, piece by piece. I was paying with my own body for the pact I had made, and there was no medicine that could cure that. Once, I tried to ask for help. I traveled to Tampico to look for Don Eliseo, that old pastor I had humiliated years before. I found him in a small church in a poor neighborhood. He received me without resentment. He listened patiently when I opened my mouth to tell him everything, to confess the pact, the cemetery, Daniela's death. My voice disappeared. It simply vanished. I moved my mouth, but no sound came out. I was mute for 3 whole days. The following Wednesday, Don Aurelio appeared at my door. He came in uninvited. He sat down in my living room and said with that disgusting smile, "Don't try that again, Roberto. Next time you try to tell our secret, your daughter will be the one who's going to be mute forever." He got up and left. I stood there paralyzed with fear. I was trapped in a snare I'd set myself, and there was no one who could get me out, or at least that's what I thought at the time. Sister Consuelo was 74 years old and had been walking with the Lord for almost 50 years. She was a widow's. She lived alone in a small house near the Juarez market and got up every day at 4 o'clock a.m. to pray. The people at church saw her as a strange old woman, always talking about visions and dreams that no one understood, but I knew she was dangerous. Ever since I had made the pact, she looked at me differently, as if she could see right through me, as if she could see what I was hiding under my suit and Bible. Her nightmares had become more frequent. She told me once that she saw me preaching, but behind me was a huge shadow with red eyes whispering things in my ear. I laughed in her face, called her a crazy old woman, but inside I was terrified, because I also sometimes saw that shadow out of the corner of my eye when I was alone at home. The difference was that Consuelo saw it from the outside. She saw the truth I was hiding from the world. In April 2017, the week before Holy Week, Consuelo spent 3 days in complete fasting, consuming only water and prayer. She told Denise that God had commanded her to prepare, that something big was going to happen on Good Friday, that she needed to be ready. I found out about this and got nervous. I thought about canceling the special service that week, making up some excuse, but then I thought, what can an almost 75-year-old woman do against me? I was the apostle, I had the power. On Good Friday, the church was packed like never before. More than 100 people had come for the special Easter service. I went up to the pulpit, began preaching about the crucifixion of Christ, and in the middle of the sermon, I moved into the healing portion. I closed my eyes, let the spirits show me the secrets, and began to minister. I pointed to a man and revealed a hidden illness. I pointed to a woman and revealed a hidden sin. The people were impressed. As always, everything seemed normal. It was then that Sister Consuelo stood up. She was in the 4th row on the left. She rose slowly, as if her knees ached, and stood staring at me. The church fell silent. I stopped speaking. Everyone turned to look at her, and then, with a firm voice I had never heard from that old woman, she cried out, "You lying spirit, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ." His voice echoed throughout the temple as if he had a microphone. I answered calmly. I should have asked the officers to take her out, but I was no longer in control of my own body. I turned toward her slowly and felt my face twist. I felt my eyes change. Everything went dark for a second, and when it cleared, I saw differently. I saw red, and out of my mouth came a voice that wasn't mine, a deep, ancient voice, full of hatred. It said, "Old woman, you don't know who you're talking to." More than 1,000 people saw what happened next. My body began to writhe in the pulpit, my neck twisted sideways at an angle a human neck can't twist. I fell to the floor and began to crawl like a snake, hissing, drooling, making sounds that weren't human. Women fainted, children cried, men ran for the door. 6 men tried to stop me. I knocked them all away with a single blow. One of them crashed into a pew and broke his arm. Consuelo didn't back down. While everyone else was running or screaming, she walked to the front of the church with firm steps. She took a small bottle of anointing oil from her bag, the one she always carried, and poured it on me. Where the oil touched my skin, I felt a burning sensation. It wasn't a normal burn, it was far from the inside. I screamed with voices that weren't mine. I screamed names I didn't know. I screamed in languages I had never heard in my life. The deliverance lasted for hours. Consuelo called for other intercessors, the few who hadn't fled. They prayed. They sang. They rebuked. At least 9 different voices came out of my body that night. One was a child's, one was an old woman's, one spoke Latin, another spoke a language no one recognized. Each demon gave a name before leaving. The church lights began to flicker one by one. Only the votive candles Consuelo had brought remained. When the last voice left, it was almost 4 o'clock a.m. On Holy Saturday. All the candles went out suddenly and then relit themselves. I woke up lying on the church floor, drenched in sweat, shivering with cold. I had lost about 15 kg in a few hours. My eyes were sunken, my hands were numb, they stopped trembling. Consuelo was kneeling beside me, holding my hand with her old, wrinkled hands. She looked at me with those tired, wise eyes and said, "They're gone, son, you're free." But I knew that wasn't the end. Liberation was only the beginning. Now came the hardest part, facing everything I had done. They took me to Sister Consuelo's house that same Holy Saturday morning. I couldn't walk well, so two brothers carried me to a car and drove me there. Her house was small, it smelled of copal incense and homemade coffee. She put me to bed in a small room at the back with a single bed and an image of Christ crucified on the wall. She told me I would stay there until I got better. I didn't have the strength to argue. My body was broken and my soul shattered. I spent a week in that room. I couldn't eat anything. Everything I swallowed, I threw up. I vomited thick, black bile that smelled like dead things. I had a fever of 40 degrees Celsius that wouldn't go down, and then came a chill so strong my teeth chattered. Even though I was covered with 3 blankets, Consuelo and 3 other intercessors took turns praying beside me day and night without stopping. The demons refused to leave completely. There were still roots inside. On the 3rd day, I had a seizure. My body shook in that bed for almost 15 minutes. The women held my arms and legs while they prayed. I heard their voices as if they were coming from very far away, muffled, and I heard other voices too, voices that insulted me, that told me I belonged to them forever, that it wasn't worth fighting. One voice told me it was going to kill my daughter Amanda if I didn't stop resisting. I wanted to give up. I wanted to tell the intercessors to leave and accept my fate, but Consuelo wouldn't let me. She knelt beside the bed, took my hand with those old, wrinkled hands, and whispered, "Roberto, you have to fight, God hasn't given up on you." And at that moment, something broke inside me. I began to cry. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. I cried for Lucia, whom I had lost, for my children, whom I had destroyed, for Daniela, whom I had helped to kill. I cried for everything I had thrown away because of my vanity. On the 7th day, the morning of Holy Saturday, I woke up feeling different. The fever had broken, the nausea had passed. I was able to sit up in bed on my own for the first time all week. Consuelo came into the room with a cup of chamomile tea and saw that my eyes were normal again. They were no longer submerged, no longer shrouded in darkness. She smiled that kind grandmother's smile and said to me, "They're gone, son, you're free." But I knew that freedom came at a price, and that price was the truth. I told Consuelo everything, the cemetery, Don Orleo, the pact, the healings that came from demons. I told her about Rosario, who tried to commit suicide. I told her about Daniela. I told her that I knew she was going to die and I did nothing to stop it. I told her that I had killed that girl. Consuelo listened to everything in silence, without interrupting me, without judging me. When I finished, she squeezed my hand and said, "The blood of Christ can still cleanse you, Roberto. But you have to confess to God and the church." On Easter Sunday, I returned to the church, but I didn't go up to the pulpit. I entered through the back door, walked down the center aisle, and knelt before the altar. The temple was packed with about 800 people who had come for the Easter service, everyone silently staring at me. I raised my head and began to speak. I told everything, from beginning to end, the pact at the Day of the Dead cemetery, the spirits, the fake healings, Daniela's death, everything, The word hurt like a knife in my chest, but I needed to say it. When I said Daniela's name, when I confessed that I had helped kill her, Doña Carmen stood up in the back of the church. She walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes red from crying. Everyone made way for her. I closed my eyes, expecting a blow, a slap, a shout. I deserved that and much more, but Doña Carmen stopped in front of me, remained silent for a long time, and then bent down. She took my face in her hands and looked me in the eyes. She said, "I forgive you, Roberto, because if I don't forgive you, hatred will destroy me too." I broke down. I wept in the arms of this woman who had every right to hate me, but chose to forgive me. The whole church wept with us. Some left, horrified by what I had confessed, but others stayed and prayed with me. And at that moment, as I knelt weeping on the floor of that church, it began to rain, a heavy downpour that seemed to come out of nowhere. The sky had been clear just 5 minutes before. The rain was pouring in through a broken window and soaking me there on my knees. A brother said softly, "It's God washing this altar." I never pastored again after that day. I lost everything, the church, my fame, my money, my family. Lucia didn't come back, and I didn't have the courage to ask her to. I moved to a small town near Saltillo in Koala. I went back to working like I did before all this, an ordinary man. Today I work as a night watchman at a warehouse. I earn minimum wage. I live in a rented room. I go to a small church on Sundays. I sit in the back pew. I don't tell anyone who I was. When they ask me why I cry so much during the praise songs, I just say it's gratitude. Gratitude because God gave me a second chance that I didn't deserve. Years later, a young pastor recognized me and came to ask if I had any advice for him. I looked him in the eyes and said, "The only thing I truly know, never change the voice of God, no other, because the other voices charge and the price is always higher than you can pay." Don Aurelio never appeared again, but sometimes when I see a man in a black suit on the street, my heart still races, because I know he's still out there somewhere looking for desperate pastors to give them the same deal he gave me, and I pray every day that they'll be smarter than I was. Send feedback.